Alright guys, before we get started on the video, quick update on the channel and me. For a bit I was working at a company called Genesis as a full stack developer. Genesis is a crypto trading firm. But anyway, I left there and now I'm at a startup doing Solana program development for a DEX that they're building. So the kind of sporadic videos and stuff like that is because I've been busy with all of that stuff. So let's continue with the video. Okay guys, so we're going to continue our introduction to Solana by going into, I guess, the next natural step, which is NFTs. And we're going to take a look at the Metaplex SDK, the JavaScript SDK. I'm going to show you some working code. I'm going to also show you something probably even more important than the code itself, which is a lot of gotchas that made some of the stuff just simply not work as it was supposed to. But having said that, before I continue, if you don't know Solana already, at least some of the basics of programming on Solana, I would suggest taking a look at my Solana videos, the 3 existing ones. I'm going to put a link in the description. So first of all, real quick, what is an NFT? An NFT is just a single custom token that represents an asset. So normally when you have a token on a blockchain, you're going to have some arbitrary number of, the same token, right? 1,000,000 tokens, 1,000,000,000 tokens, whatever. But in the case of an NFT, it's really not complicated. All you're doing is you're saying that there's only going to be one single issuance of the token, and it's going to have 0 decimal places. So then how does Metaplex fall into this? So you create the token, the custom mint, and the token itself via just plain vanilla Solana. But what Metaplex gives you, and you can tell this by the name, is it gives you all of the descriptors and all of the extra kind of data about the data, about the token, the NFT token, that is peripheral to the token itself, but very necessary. So for example, it could be as simple as the name itself, but it could also be as important as where the content information associated to this NFT exists on. So in the case of Solana, the reason why that's so important is because Solana isn't a blockchain for storing data. So it's not really intended for you to put videos, large images, stuff like that, even if it's relevant to your NFT onto Solana. Solana is more about fast and cheap processing. So 99% of the time, if you have any significant size data, you're going to probably be putting it on something like Arweave, and you're going to be pointing to it from Solana. So the metadata system in Metaplex is providing a lot of helper and utility functions to allow you to do that, first of all, more easily with their API, but also in a very standardized way so that all the NFTs on their ecosystem can basically look alike, and you can expect that, certain fields are always going to be there, etc. In other words, standardization. So the metadata portion of the token is going to be listing this information as you see here. Some of the more important ones are, again, the URL pointing to the actual content data, but also, if need be, some of the creators and the fees that they can partake in should the NFT be sold again, what percentages they can get, basically, stuff like that. So you have the creators list and other information related to that. But in addition, what this URI does is it points to an actual JSON file. So again, this file is not going to be saved on Solana. It's usually going to be saved, on Arweave or IPFS, or even in the case of certain projects like OpenSea, they might be saved on a centralized database. But anyway, the JSON is going to have sort of the metadata that is not so specific to Solana, but is more targeted to the contents of the NFT itself. So you have all of this information, but some of the big ones are going to be, where that image, because, most of the NFTs nowadays are just images, right? But where that image is stored. So in this case, again, it's on Arweave, but it's up to you. You can store it wherever you want, but obviously having it on a decentralized store makes a lot of sense for Web3. There are also many other standardized sort of fields that might be custom and important to your NFT and your NFT community. So certain custom attributes, and then of course additional files that might be tied to your NFT. So although currently most NFTs are just, some image, the monkeys, the penguins, whatever it may be, but a lot of NFTs are coming out for music, for video, stuff like that. So you can put related files in here. And then on top of that, I am using this properties field to put in my own custom fields and custom data in here specific to my needs, and you can do that as well. So in reality, a lot of people get confused about Metaplex, but there's really not that much to it. At its core, as the name implies, it's about metadata and storing metadata in a standardized way that's reliable and consistent. Now, on top of that, I think maybe part of the confusion is you've seen things about Candy Machine and auctions and stuff like that. Those are kind of more peripheral things that are definitely important. So Candy Machine is about, selling one-off NFTs, and auctions is about auctioning NFTs and stuff like that. But these are just, more detail type stuff. You could obviously not use either of these and customize your own, and you would still have a standardized NFT with the metadata that people would expect if you're using Metaplex. So I think to avoid confusion, just unless you really need these items, just ignore those and focus on just getting, how should I say, again, a standardized NFT out in the Solana ecosystem. And then you can move on from there, according to whatever your needs are. All right, so let's start looking at some code. Now, before I go through this, I want to explain a couple of things. So as you can see, this is my dchat repository. It's a turbo repo, so it's a mono repo. I am using, and I mentioned this in my Twitter, but I have decided to switch to using something called Tori. So Tori is a native application builder. Currently, it only works for desktops, but eventually they're going to make a version for iOS and Android. So I'm going to be able to build a single app and deploy to all major platforms. But it's also, because it has a native component written in Rust, there's quite a chunk of the app that is very performant because of the native code that is inside of it. But at the same time, on the client side, I can just use regular NPM packages. In my case, I'm using React and a bundler called Vite.js, because it just is much faster at building than Create React app. So so that's this project right here. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is when you guys create, if you decide to go with Tori, but actually, even if you don't decide to go with Tori and you just decide to go with vanilla Create React app or Vite or any of the other bundlers and packages out there, what's going to happen is a lot of these Metaplex and even the bundler related calls, they're going to fail. And the reason why that is happening is because internally these SDKs, instead of using browser APIs, they're actually using Node APIs. And since if you're building with React, Vue, Svelte, whatever, these are browser-based frameworks. Even in the case of Tori, again, I'm building kind of a shell UI with React, which is running in a web view, even though the rest of the application is a native, application. So this stuff is, these SDKs from Solana are expecting certain Node APIs to exist. So process, buffer, whatever, crypto, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of stuff, when you set it up, everything seems to be set up correctly, it's just going to fail. So in this portion of the video, I'm going to show you the code, how I set everything up, but also how to get around all of these errors that inevitably you're gonna run into. So the first thing that I did is I wanted to break up, my code, separation of concerns, all that stuff. So this is the piece that handles the Metaplex specific NFT metadata and NFT creation portion. And then this is the portion that connects to Bundler. And if you're not familiar with Arweave, so I am going to be saving my images, so let me back up real quick. DChat is a social network app. It's like Twitter, Instagram, kind of a hybrid of both. So you can post messages and images and stuff like that. So all of that data is going to be saved as an NFT from DChat. And I have chosen the larger data, again, the images, text, post, whatever, to be saved on Arweave. So I'm using Bundler to do that because it allows integration with Solana wallets. So the app will only need a single wallet as opposed to needing a Solana wallet and an Arweave wallet. Bundler supports Sol tokens and just does a conversion behind the scenes. So that's super helpful, I think, for user experience. So I'm going with Bundler. But I wanted to separate that code out so that they're distinct and I can manage them separately. In addition to that, the Bundler code has what I would consider a bug inside of it. Again, having to do with the whole node polyfill stuff. So although, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is although Metaplex has built within it helpers that will allow you to stay in the Metaplex SDK ecosystem and just make calls to Bundler from there, with stuff like upload metadata. This guy right here, to Metaplex file from browsers. So this will allow you to upload into Arweave, assuming that's your chosen backend, into Arweave the file that you have. And then the upload metadata is creating that JSON file that we saw earlier, with the right fields in there automatically for you. So if that piece worked, it would have been great and really streamlined and smooth, but it wasn't working because there were some issues in the Bundler API, which we're going to get into. So first of all, let's start from the top. These are the main Solana SDKs that you're going to need. So the regular Web3 SDK. So this makes the connection. This allows you to manage key pairs, pick whichever cluster that you're going to be on. So DevNet, TestNet, mainnet, all that good stuff. In our case, since we're testing, we're going to be on DevNet, both on Solana and Bundler. So that's that. And then in here is where you have all of the Metaplex NFT metadata specific stuff. So this thing, let's drill into the code. So by the way, I'm doing it this way as opposed to typing because I think it saves time. And I know for a fact that everything here works as opposed to typing something, having it not work, fail, having to fix it, and wasting a bunch of time doing that. So anyway, obviously this is the constructor. It expects a dependency injected implementation of the data service, which again is going to be Bundler. And then in this case, this is a native desktop application. In this case, eventually when I build the mobile apps, they're going to be using whatever wallet apps are on the phone. So Phantom, Soulflare, whatever it may be. So then if you drill down into the constructor, we first make a connection. We determine whether we're on development or not, and then choose the appropriate cluster. And then after that, we have to instantiate all of the objects necessary to make Metaplex work. So in this case, we take that connection object from Solana Web3, and then we basically create a Metaplex object out of it. But in order to do that, we have to indicate what type of wallet that we're using. So in this case, key pair identity means that basically I used the wallet JSON file. I converted it into a key pair object and I'm passing it in. So in the case of if you're using one of the wallets and the wallet APIs, meaning the Solana mobile wallet, Solana wallet adapters, then there's a separate API that you can make, API call that you can make to interface to those types of wallets. So in this case, like I said, I'm using Bundler. I don't actually need this because, like I said, I had to bypass the Metaplex's instantiation of Bundler for the node Polyfill issues. So this can be removed, but I'm putting it here to indicate that if you're in an environment that doesn't cause those issues, then you do have to pass this in if you're going to use Bundler. So then the current function that I have implemented is a function that is posting an isolated message. So I'm not doing a response. I'm not doing a retweet or a resend. I'm just posting, some message in isolation. So the way that I'm doing that is, of course, I have some related information. And this function isn't completely finished yet, so I'm not passing in a physical file yet. But what I'm doing is, first of all, I'm creating the Metaplex JSON object. So again, that would be this data right here. And I don't need most of the data, so a lot of the data I'm just leaving out. But in my case, I'm using the properties field again and having its own content field and putting the user's text message in there. And then I'm putting in a name. Over time, as I flesh this out, I'm going to add more fields as relevant. Of course, once I start using the file, I'm going to use this field, but I haven't gotten that far yet. But I will fit that in here. So once I do that, I create a blob out of that JSON file and I pass it to the bundler data service. Again, I'm not using upload metadata to do this because it wasn't working. And then when we get to this function, I will explain why. So then after I do that, assuming this call goes through successfully, now I have an actual JSON metadata file that is existing inside of rweave.net. And then I'm able to use it to create an NFT via Metaplex. So again, I give it the name, I give it the URI to wherever that JSON file is, which again, in our case is rweave. And then I'm not doing any seller fee basis points. These are the fees that the original creators can get when they're when the NFT is being sold again. So this is just for getting errors and logging them. Like I said before, I was having a lot of issues with this. So if we go to the app, and I preloaded this, and this is all just test data, so I'm just going to click it. But if we wait for the response, we should see the JSON's TXID, and then we should also see some of the data specific to the NFT itself. Today it's kind of slow. Usually it's not this slow. So if we open this up, actually let me close this for a moment. So here you can see JSON. The username that I'm using is user A. And then I have the Unix timestamp. And then, of course, there is a lot of data specific to the NFT itself, including the minter of the NFT and other information. So, okay, so this is not that hard, right? You know, .create or .upload metadata, like what is the big deal here? So, again, the Solana's APIs tend to use a lot of node API calls, buffer, stream, process, whatever. The trend nowadays in these bundlers, package creators, whatever you want to call them, is to push towards using browser APIs and standardize on browser APIs. And that makes a lot of sense because if you're on the browser, there is no node. So there's really no reason why you have to call into node, especially since some of the calls aren't even for security reasons allowed on the browser anyway. Like you can't directly access the file system, from a browser app. So having said that, the Solana APIs still make heavy use of node APIs. So if you're using Vite, right, and the information that I'm giving you is specific to Vite, it's slightly different for Create React App, and I'm sure it's different for other builders. But for Vite, you first have to install these packages, right? So these are going to give you the polyfills. And then I know we're at the top, but let's start at the bottom here. So in order to fill in things like the buffer object, you would need to do this, right? Under optimized dependencies. In my case, I am using ES Next, although I believe currently Tori only supports up to ES 2021, but I did have some issues trying to use ES 2021, so I just went with ES Next. But what I'm saying is you do need a bare minimum ES version of, I believe, ES 2020 in order for some of these calls to work. Like, for example, BigInt. I think actually in the case of BigInt, you need ES 2021 to make that work. And in a couple of the calls, they actually did use BigInt. So that's why I ended up just saying, screw it, let me go with the latest one. And I did the update to ES Next. So on top of that, inside of the build settings, I'm targeting, again, ES Next. And then inside of rollups, I'm targeting crypto, and crypto is a separate package, crypto browserify. So make sure in the resolve section under aliases, you have at least all of these in place so that when some dependency of some other dependency, decides to call something, it's not going to just blow up. So you need all of these pieces in place, including the packages. And then finally, on top of all that, you also need, and make sure this is there. This was here when I first created this project, but I think on some older versions it might not be. But on top of all of that, you're also gonna require the global this. So in a browser app, you can basically think of global this as window, but in the case of Node, there sort of kind of isn't one. So you need global this, which is basically the node process or the root node object. And that's what this is going to give you. So assuming you have all of those polyfills in place, all of the metadata Metaplex code should then be able to run without any issues. So then let's move on to this call right here. So then again, why couldn't I use upload metadata? Why did I have to switch to this? So in the case of Bundler, they actually have two versions. So I think early on they realized this issue with the Node versus the browser APIs. So they actually did make two kind of versions of their API. One that is using Node, one that is not using Node. That's using, the browser-based APIs. But the problem is internally, Metaplex's bundler implementation uses the Node version. So in doing so, the certain things basically don't work. That's the bottom line, right? So in effect, certain things don't work. Because like I said, even if you're using the polyfills and you have everything in place and all of the polyfill packages and all of the little pointers that are required and the aliases and all of that business, there are certain calls that are not allowed for security reasons and sandboxing within the browser context. It simply won't allow you to do it. So certain calls to path and FS are going to fail. So what you need to do is, again, don't use the Metaplex bundler call, upload metadata. And instead, you're going to have to create your own service. And you're going to use the non-node version, which is this. But in order to do that, you're going to have to manually configure a lot of the fields and a lot of the configurations instead of the normal action, which is just to make this single new bundler call. You're going to have to do additional work, basically. So let's go through what that is. So first of all, we have our bundler instance. We're going to get the id.json file for the Solana wallet. I realize that it's not called JWK, but I'm just keeping the names that they have in the bundler docs just to keep things consistent. But you do have to create the instance and kind of fill it in with some of the base information. So in this case, it would be whichever bundler URL that you are using. And in my case, I have a native app, so I can use .env if I want to. Just realize that in Vite, you have to prefix with Vite underscore in order for the system to allow you to have variables that are usable. So anyway, I have this going to DevNet. So I'm telling Bundler I'm going to use DevNet. Then I'm going to use the currency of Solana and not Arweave, which means that it will recognize this as a Solana wallet. And then I'm using the Solana DevNet cluster, right? API.devnet. And then that's the basic configuration. So then on top of that, again, I have to do a little bit extra work, which is to create a customized version of Solana config, which is the under the covers configuration that the bundler is using. So again, Solana, the ticker of the token is Sol, the URL, the wallet, blah, blah, blah. So then on top of that, there's certain fields that must be manually updated. So as you can see, these are all related to configuration of various sorts. But every single one of them is necessary. So then once I'm done doing that, then I take my regular classes bundler object. It's now complete, ready to go. And then I set that right here so that when this call is made, the call goes to here and this .bundler is ready to go. So what is it that I'm doing in this call to bundler? So the first thing that I need to do is I need to fund bundler so that it will, pay for the transaction that bundler is about to do, just like any other network, right? But in order to pay, I need to know the size of the data that I'm looking to upload onto Arweave, right? So this bundler call is going to do that based upon the byte size, not the array length. So you take the file, which is a blob, and you get the size out of it. That gives you the price, and then you're going to fund that much into the bundler nodes. Again, bundler will auto convert your sols into Arweave, so you don't need to deal with any of that stuff, which is part of the benefit of using bundler. So once that completes, and we're awaiting that because it has to finish first. So once that completes, we're using a raw transaction creator call. There's a couple of different calls. Some of the helper calls like upload file are quicker and easier to use, but I'm just using the raw transaction call. And the call is going to create a buffer to represent the file, and it's going to put some tags in there. Currently, the app is still in development, so I'm just putting in some, fake tags just to make sure that they get in there. And then this will only create a transaction object. It doesn't complete the transaction. So the next thing you have to do is sign off. So, it's confirming that, the user actually wanted to do this. And then you do that actual upload of the transaction, and then you get the ID. So after you've done all that, your transaction will succeed, and you'll know that it succeeded because you will be able to get back all of the NFT peripheral data that you needed. Yeah, that is it. So I hope this helped. If you have any questions, leave a comment in the video, and thanks.